My name is Rachael Sicari. I'm a mental health counselor. Christine came to therapy following her second hospitalization. She was involuntarily admitted to the state hospital following an attempted overdose of prescription medication. She attributed the attempt to an argument with her husband, who had petitioned for the admission. Christine sat in my office, rail thin, slack, gray in the face. She was wearing sweatpants, a sweatshirt, and sneakers. Her hair was in a messy bun. There were errant gray hairs springing out every which way. She barely smiled. She seemed to force the corners of her mouth up, as a measure of being polite. Her misery was palpable. She told me that she was now estranged from her husband, Craig, that she felt betrayed by him petitioning her, that he was trying to kidnap their dog, and that she felt she'd met someone in the hospital who she now called her boyfriend. He had driven her to our appointment on that day. She described symptoms of anxiety, depression, obsessive-compulsive rituals, interpersonal conflict, sleep disturbance, and chronic suicidal thoughts and urges. She reported a long history of suicide attempts. Craig was her 5th husband, and they were headed for divorce. Christine had been fired from her administrative job 3 months prior. It was a job with significant responsibility, working for a renowned organization. She had worked there for nearly 3 years. She believed she was wrongfully terminated and described crippling anxiety whenever she thought of working or thought of her previous job. She asked for help in dealing with the crushing guilt she felt for losing the job and abandoning the patrons for whom she had grown to care. Christine, like many of my clients, was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, or BPD. The diagnosis was new to her, even in her late 40s. However, she accepted it, and she was happy to receive prescribed medication meant to treat agitation and sleeplessness. She came to therapy inconsistently over the next 2 months. She introduced me to her boyfriend, Jake, the one she met in the hospital, the one much younger than her, following her around eagerly, his shoulders stooped sheepishly. She told me Jake was staying with her at her apartment, that her husband had moved out, and that she also had roommates living there to help with the mounting bills. She complained that the roommates were disruptive and difficult to deal with, but that she needed the income. Despite this, she was served with an eviction notice. She told me she didn't know where she'd be going, but that Jake was doing some work under the table for her brother, and that they'd be okay. One day, Christine's boyfriend called to cancel her therapy appointment. He said on the message that Christine had bronchial pneumonia and she was at the ER. Every time I'd seen Christine, she was coughing or showed other visible signs of sickness. I put it out of my mind and I resolved to call her the following week to reschedule therapy. 2 days later, I got an email from the case manager who acts as the liaison for the courts. Chrissy was at House of Corrections, being held for possession of a controlled substance, heroin. I stared at the screen in stupefied disbelief. How could I have not known? Stick thin, always sick-looking, eviction, threatened overdose, marital problems, sketchy roommates, all the signs were there. I looked at her intake assessment, substance abuse profile. Last opiate use, Percocet, maybe 2 months before. Of course she wasn't going to tell her intake specialist, or me, or the doctor who did her psych eval, that she was actively using heroin. Christine spent the next 2 weeks in jail. She detoxed without any medical intervention. They gave her no psych meds. She sat and suffered alone. On the outside, Christine's boyfriend helped to vacate the apartment. Now that the eviction was finalized, her best friend got her car out of impound, paying hundreds of dollars of charges. Her mother visited her. Her father did not. One of her 3 children visited her. Christine needed a discharge appointment with me and a place to stay in order to get out. They agreed to let her stay with her estranged husband's mother in another county. Craig had worked to coordinate things for Christine while she was in jail and had put money on her account. The next time I saw Christine, we sat there in charged silence for several moments. I had never treated someone with an active heroin addiction. I was scared. "So, how long have you been using?" I asked. I figured cards are on the table, it's time to talk this thing out. Therapy is useless when the client is hiding huge portions of their life. She went on to admit, amongst waves of shame and guilt and regret, that she'd been intermittently using since she got out of the hospital, that she and Jake had been using together. She stated she'd used in the past, however her drugs of choice were previously crack and meth. Following several months of snorting Percocet, typically in social settings, Christine had made friends with people who were using heroin and got involved with it herself. She described a youth filled with partying, drinking, using pot and ecstasy. She lost her children during those years, all 3 of them. She had just established a relationship with her youngest, the mother of her only grandchild, as of the last few years. She told me she'd gone to rehab several times and had previously had 7 years of sobriety. Until she married Craig. Then they started using together alcohol and weed, then ecstasy, then coke, then pills, then dope. Her children were adults and they no longer lived with her. Craig's kids never lived with them. The 2 enjoyed their adult lives, including partying to the point of a life-threatening addiction. I would later find out that the argument that led to Christine's attempted overdose, when Craig would admit her to New Hampshire Hospital, was an argument about money. The argument about money stemmed from them using their utility bill money to buy dope. They had also fought about buying heroin to share, and one of them using it all without sharing it. She would also tell me that the shady roommates were actually her drug dealer and his girlfriend, both of whom had ripped Christine and Jake off, both of whom had stolen from them, and she admitted she had done the same to them, amongst others. Christine was pulled over by the cops leaving a dealer's house with Jake in the passenger seat. She had a small amount of heroin in the car. They found it and arrested Christine, but not Jake. Jake later denied using to his family and reportedly made several claims about Christine to his family and her family to shift the blame from him to her. He relied on his parents for support between his many hospitalizations and arrests. He couldn't let them know that not only was he using, but he was injecting. Christine would say, "I snort it, Jake shoots it. I'm not an IV drug user, he is." Over the months following her arrest, things changed rapidly and relentlessly. Christine had come into therapy complaining of extreme difficulty and rigidity in the face of change. Her anxiety increased, her suicidal thoughts increased, and her obsessive-compulsive rituals increased. With all these come strong urges to use. Christine was left with no choice but to live with Craig's mother, Darlene, who she claimed was a filthy, immobilized hoarder. Christine was a fastidious, perfectionistic housekeeper. Darlene was controlling. She pitched a fit every time Christine tried to clean or rearrange things in the house. Based on this living situation, as well as the arrangements Craig had orchestrated while Christine was in jail, Christine was forced to make nice with Craig, a man she had previously said was a useless, abusive asshole who she couldn't win to divorce. She said while she was in the hospital, he was running the streets smoking crack. Christine and Jake were separated abruptly without their consent, without any opportunity for goodbyes. Once Christine got word of the things Jake had said to their families about her, the accusations and the denials, she told me how angry she was. As much as she felt hurt and betrayed by Craig, she also felt hurt and betrayed by Jake. Craig also said he couldn't trust Christine. He was paranoid and suspicious. She'd keep seeing Jake or talk to him behind Craig's back. The family lived in a state of trauma and shock for weeks. Christine reluctantly visited more family, bathing in toxic shame. She described emotional agony seeing her father for the first time. She eventually wrote a letter that enumerated what jail was like. She described the feelings of loneliness, alienation, and helplessness, and more than anything else, the loss of control. She said once the door slammed shut behind her, she knew she was at the mercy of the system and had lost all autonomy. The next year would be an exercise in giving up control, of having it pried from her hands. Christine had no criminal record. The prosecutor offered her a felony diversion program, which she eagerly took. Continued counseling, late act evaluation, community service, mandatory meetings, and fines. She was happy to submit to the terms to avoid a felony on her record or more jail time. Her involvement in the legal system and associated organizations of support and recovery changed her life again. Over the following several months, Christine's appearance began to change. The color came back to her face. Her chronic cough stopped. She quit smoking cigarettes. She put on weight. She even had a bit of a belly. I was happy to see it protruding one day under her sweater. She started attending not just HA, but NA, CA, AA, really any meeting she could find. She and Craig slowly and cautiously repaired their relationship, and she discontinued speaking with or seeing Jake, who was still using and getting in trouble all over the state. She spent quiet time at her mother-in-law's house, with her parents, with her daughter and grandson, and at various meetings and appointments. A few months after her release, Craig was sentenced to a year in jail, related to crimes committed while they were using. He had committed check fraud in the previous year to help finance their habit. When Craig went to jail, Christine was faced with an even bigger challenge. Living alone with his mother, who she found disrespectful, nosy, even hostile. Christine had never done well with being alone, part of the reason she'd have 5 husbands. She reported never really having a gap between partners. She would jump from one right to the next. This is also partly diagnostic. Both she and Craig were nervous about all the time Christine would spend in the absence of her husband. Would she go back to Jake? Would she go out and use again? Christine resolved to attend 90 meetings in 90 days following Craig's imprisonment. She did this and then some, attending up to 10 meetings a week. She made friends in and out of the legal system, friends who were both new and seasoned in recovery. She selected a sponsor, someone who was also struggling with mental illness along with opiate addiction. Christine has since gotten her own apartment, secured an income, completed community service, re-engaged with her faith, remained loyal to her husband, visiting him frequently and bringing his son for visits to the jail. When she comes to therapy now, she is fresh-faced, clean, well-groomed, she smells good, her hair is shiny and immaculately styled, she wears flattering, fashionable clothes. She's never late and barely ever cancels or reschedules our appointments. She's learning and utilizing skills to manage her overwhelming emotions associated with BPD. Recently, Christine celebrated 1 year of abstinence from heroin and other substances. She received a key tag, chips in CA and AA. She has satisfied all the conditions of her felony diversion and has not experienced a relapse since being released from jail. She began attending the methadone clinic briefly, but discontinued after a couple of weeks. She has done it with the help of her community and natural supports. Christine has taught me innumerable lessons. When I sit with her now, I see a woman full of life and love, a caring mother, a doting grandmother, a loyal wife, a committed client, and a renewed practitioner of her faith. I see hope for recovery and a success story for someone whose addiction numbed the pain of their illness. Although many of my clients inspire me with their stories of change, Christine has simply blown me away. My work with her has been revelatory, and she has changed my life by having the courage to change hers.